Hello, friends. My name is Andrew Sweeny from Parallax, and this is a quick plug for what we are up to and how you can participate in or support our activities. Firstly, me and Tom Amark are developing Parallax Academy. We have several fantastic new courses available. We also have a membership program that allows you to participate in live events and community discussions. Furthermore, if you become a member, you can participate in one of our study groups. And if you're interested in one-to-one dialogue, I offer what I call meaning coaching. Finally, you can simply subscribe and like our YouTube channel or sign up for our newsletter to keep abreast of all of our activities. In any case, thank you in advance for any support or good vibes or participation in this project. And please join us and help us to rebuild spirituality, rethink philosophy, and reimagine culture. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm super happy to talk to John Vervaeke and Christopher Mastropietro, two of my favorite guys out there. Even though we have never met in person, I have immense warmth towards both of you, and I listen to you speak with great pleasure, and I have been catching up on your discussions about Kierkegaard. And Socrates, and so I won't go into introductions. People can find out all about you. You kind of both, I think people in our circles know who you are. I wanted to talk about Kierkegaard and Socrates because what hit me was when Christopher said, I deeply love Kierkegaard, and that was the reason. And so Kierkegaard would be a hard guy to love in many ways, but I think it is the case that when we love a thinker or a philosopher, it's a profound relationship. So I wanted to hear about Christopher's love of Kierkegaard and John's love of Kierkegaard, and then maybe we can go into more John's love of Socrates, perhaps, and then we can go into more detail about some of the ideas. Is that okay with you, gentlemen?
Great.
Sure.
Okay. So why do you love Kierkegaard so much, Chris?
Chris, that's a great question for you. Really, it is.
Yeah. It is a great question. It is a great question. You know what? I actually think part of why I love him is because he's hard to love. I think the really funny thing about Kierkegaard is that I'm pretty sure Kierkegaard would not like me very much. And he probably wouldn't like pretty much anything I say about him. I'm not alone in that. Like, I don't think he would like what most people say about him. And I don't think he would like most people.
Like, is you're too nice a guy or something like that?
No, I just think it's hard to explain. It's like, even those who admired his work in his own day, usually he thought they were admiring it for the wrong reasons. He's a really, really uncompromising person. And he's like truly, truly unyielding about what he expects from people and from himself. And he never lived up to it himself, and he knew it. And there is a streak of self-flagellation in him. There's no doubt about it. But I think in some ways, he said this about himself explicitly in some sense, but that his job, he had no gift for making anything easier for anybody. And so he decided that what he would do is to make things difficult, because there were so few people, as he understood it, that were taking it upon themselves to make things difficult, to chafe against people. Mm-hmm. And that by chafing against people, you could shake them out of whatever it was they were taking for granted, whatever it was that they were unaware of, whatever dream that they were dreaming, that you could jostle them from it, or at least wake them up inside of it by chafing against them, by making life hard. And in some sense, I don't think he had a choice. Like, I just think that was in some ways his personality. And I kind of think, to me, he's like the patron saint of anyone who has ever had to suffer through their own personality. His own personality made life hard for him. And I think in a strange way, making life hard for other people was his way of loving.
Excuse me, I'm gonna mute. Okay, yeah. That's funny because that was my entry into Kierkegaard as well, as this famous, passage where he's smoking a cigar and he's watching the students go up and down the street, or he's watching this very idyllic bourgeois scene and he's got everything going for him and he says, I'm going to make life difficult. And I was like, I wanted to cheer him on or something.
Yeah. And I just think he had a hard time. One of the ways I really feel for him, and I have a real sense of empathy, I think, for him, is that I think he just had a very hard time being who he was. He was this person, like, he was really prone to illness. He was this sort of pallid, almost a kind of like sickly figure. He was, but he was also like, but he was brilliant, and he was also kind of, like incredibly pretentious and just, I think, over the course of time, just realized that he couldn't help but to be the things that he was, and so decided that that's what he had to be, and that his way of loving people. And I do think it was loving. I think that's a lot of people think he just hated. He was a misanthrope. I don't think he was. I think he really did love. But I just think his way of loving people was, he brought, what's that scriptural passage? He brought he brought the sword, and I think that was his way of loving, was to admonish. And I think he was just so tortured by being the particular person that he was. He was always kind of he was atopos, right? As John likes to say, it was like he was neither here nor there all the time. He couldn't really live. He couldn't find himself at home in sort of the sociable life of his day. But he couldn't live, but there was also part of him that was deeply drawn to people and wanted. This is my reading. I mean, I don't know. It's like you could really dispute all of these things, but I get the sense of this person who is deeply, deeply drawn to people, and in some sense really wanted the love and affection of certain people, and at the same time couldn't entirely be at home in that. And there was something about the way that he was that seemed to chafe against it, and so he was constantly caught in that bind.
There's a powerful attraction to people who are alien, right? Who are homeless in that sense, who don't seem to belong, but then have this uncompromising quality. Yeah. Well, maybe we can get later talk about his relationship with Regina Olsen and the Diary of the Seductress and all that. But first, I want to bring John in and maybe ask him about why he loves Socrates so much.
Your first philosopher is like your first girlfriend, your first partner, not to be really sexist.
Excuse me.
I was in the middle of a personal meaning crisis. I had left faith, at least the Christian faith that I'd been brought up in. I was drifting through a kind of nihilism, which was magnified, no doubt, by me being in the thresholds of early adolescence, early adulthood. I mean early adulthood, not early adolescence. And I encountered Socrates in a first-year course in McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and it gave me an alternative and a way out and a door. And for that, I'm just deeply grateful. I love Socrates for that, but it became apparent that he did not only do that for me. He did that to very many people he encountered. He became a door by which they gave birth to himself, right? They gave birth to themselves. And he compared himself to a midwife. He was that kind of doorway, midwife. And he definitely did that for me. And I resonated with it. I saw how he was doing it in other people. And I saw that, in fact, he would call himself a philosopher because he was a lover only of wisdom. But for me, he's a sage. He not only speaks, his his act, we say something indeed, his actions and his character speak as loudly as anything that he spoke. His character, I aspire to it. Imagine how, what kind of courage would you like to have? Well, I want to have Socratic courage. What kind of kindness do you want to have? I want to have Socratic kindness, right? What kind of eros do you want to have? I want to have Socratic eros. What kind of reason do you want to have? Socratic reason. Again and again and again, that's what it comes out for me. So it's not only that he was kairotic for me, like he opens his door for me and for everybody that he encounters, he represents that to which I continually aspire. And like Kierkegaard, he's a pain in the ass, right? He's not here to make things easy. He's here to make things difficult. And he's here to shake you up. He compared himself to a gadfly, which is a horrible kind of stinging insect, right? I think that's one of the reasons why Kierkegaard loved Socrates so much. And his integrity is astonishing. I don't think it's inappropriate to think of Socrates as enlightened in the same way we think of Siddhartha as enlightened or Jesus as enlightened. For me, he is that kind of figure. And so my love for him is both personal in that he came to me at a point in my life that was profoundly helpful and transformative, but also aspirational. So he reaches deep into the sinews of my emergence as an adult and as a person willing to challenge nihilism. But he portends, as a portal, he portends, right, an aspirational future for me. I can't imagine I would be anything like the person I am if I had not encountered Socrates the way I encounter him. And is that not one way of describing love?
So I always think it's like a possession or something. When you really love a thinker, you become fully possessed by them or something, and you spend your whole life, if it's a really big philosopher that you love, you're possessed by them and forever, in a sense, right? So it is like a love affair that can't be diminished.
Yeah, I mean, it's possession only in the way in which eros makes us the possession of things that we are drawn to. Socrates does not want to dominate me or control me, and that is also one of the reasons why I have such strong reverence for him.
But he wants to wake us up, or
yeah, he does. Because he says repeatedly, I know that I know nothing. Yes, and of course, but like he says, right? He the unexamined life is not worth living, and he also says that practicing philosophical dialogos is the best life of a human being can have. And I took him at his word, and the only way to take him at his word is to live it and to see if it makes you I don't know what to call it, the participant in a beautiful life.
I think it's really different having a relationship with someone like Socrates as opposed to someone like Kierkegaard, even though they have so much in common. Because Socrates is, Socrates is myth at this point, right? It's like the figure of Socrates is a mythic figure. The figure that John's describing is a mythic figure, and you can internalizing a mythic figure who is, there's a deep elegance and consistency to the Socratic figure because he is myth, and a kind of purity. There's a purity of his instrument that when you play it, it's already tuned. I don't know if would you agree with that, John? Like when you take on the Socratic instrument, it's already tuned in a harmonious, in a way that taking up someone who is so much nearer to us in time, and of whom we have so much ambivalent knowledge, and is so much more humanized. There's such that, right? I mean,
Well, but wait. I agree, but you're playing in a good way, because standing behind Kierkegaard is the mythic figure of the enlightened one, Jesus, that he takes to be the Christ. And you can't really separate. And this is what Kierkegaard, I think, would want to say. You can't separate any love you have from Kierkegaard from the love for Jesus as the mythic Christ.
But there's nobody behind
That's
Socrates,
beautiful.
is there?
Yeah.
He's like a first iteration of an archetype, right?
But I think, I'm not trying to just. I'm not just trying to countermand what Chris said. I'm trying to say it's both. There is Kierkegaard who is the Nietzschean. He's human, all too human, right? Right. And in that way, he's fundamentally different from Socrates. But then there's also woven in with Kierkegaard in a way that Kierkegaard would not ever want unwoven is Jesus as the Christ, the mythic Christ. And he is at least of the same stature, if not for Kierkegaard, a greater stature than Socrates. So I would say it's a both and.
Yeah. That's really good. I like that. I think that's exactly right. Like Kierkegaard would want you looking over his shoulder at what he's looking at. Yes. He doesn't want you looking at him. He's aware. Like I think what you're saying, John, is yes, because right. Yes, they're different because they're different orders of it. They're completely different orders of reality. Right. Kierkegaard's not a symbol in the way that Socrates is, in the way that Jesus is.
That's right.
He is getting into a relationship with him is getting into a relationship that sensitizes you to getting to know what he knows. And that's his function. And that's, I think, the function he wants to serve. So he's trying to make use of his humanness so that you relate to his humanness and you relate to your own and you relate to the things that he suffers as the things that you suffer so that you can see what it is that he looks for and begin to look for it yourself.
Yeah. You see, Andrew, that's what made the conversation between Chris and I so, well, to my mind, and it sounds like to your mind, and we've got a lot of feedback of saying this, so I'm not just saying it egocentrically, but people, of course, will disagree. But to those people, I think what made the discussion so vibrant was precisely that interesting triangulation, right? There's Socrates and Kierkegaard, and then there's Kierkegaard and Jesus. And then there's a weird thing going on between Jesus and Socrates that Jacob Howland, for example, brought out in his really wonderful book on Socrates and Kierkegaard. I got to talk to Jacob Howland. It's going to come out on Jonathan Pajot's channel. And so that I just, a lot of times I felt like I was just along for the ride in that series within the series, right? Within the After Socrates series, where we're doing Socrates and Kierkegaard, because there was just that weirdly dynamic triangulation, Socrates, Kierkegaard, Jesus, and they were all bouncing off against each other, and creatively so. It was. I did not find it cacophonous. I found that we almost immediately were flowing into genuine dialogos. But that was just.
I wanted to ask you about that. I wanted to bring in the Christianity bit as well, and think about maybe the sacrifice of Socrates and the sacrifice of Kierkegaard. Socrates having a full life and then drinking the hemlock, whereas Christ dying young in this early death, and I always think about, and then also Kierkegaard dying young. I wonder if you guys had any thoughts about that, like Socrates having a full life, being the full sage, and then the Christ figure being the ultimate sort of sacrifice of you at a young period in his life.
It's interesting too, because historically, I want to be very careful that people hear what I'm saying. The literature about these two is interwoven. There's good reason to believe that the Socratic template was taken up by the writers of the gospel, and it influenced how they understood Jesus as the sacrifice. Of course, they're also deeply, profoundly influenced by the Jewish, prophetic tradition and the suffering servant and the sacrificial lamb. But one way of thinking about the Christ mythos is that it's a mythos that draws these two together and then makes something new come out of it. And so that's just a way of saying it's really tricky to answer. I think your question is completely good, Andrew. I'm not trying to backhand it in any way, but it's tricky to try and do this comparison because they're not completely separate, and they have this weird, again, the literatures about them have this weird relationship that's really hard to get outside of, to know where we would stand such that we would try and compare the two together.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, I could really relate to Christopher when you were talking about how you have this intense relationship with Christianity, but you couldn't never fully commit yourself to the faith of Christianity. And feeling the same way, but not wanting to alienate my Christian friends, and really getting a lot of, let's say, richness from the Christian tradition, but without being able to fully commit myself to it on some level. So I feel the same way about that as you were speaking of, Christopher.
I appreciate you saying that. And I think we've touched on that before, Andrew.
Yeah.
So I'm recollecting that as you say it. And we are definitely not alone. Like, in some ways it has become, I don't know, it's hard to trace this historically, but at least if it wasn't always, it has become, absurdly enough, it's become one of the defining characteristics of being a Christian, or being a particular kind of Christian, is being caught in that predicament. And one of Kierkegaard was someone who helped me to appreciate and understand that predicament much better, and to not understand, and to not think of it more pathologically than is necessary, right? And it's a particular, like, one of the, John and I have been talking about this a lot lately, and one of the things that I'm coming to more and more is I'm starting to be able to rest in ambivalence a little bit more, to realize that I'm neither here nor there, and that I'm halfway somewhere, and I'm always halfway somewhere, and to pause there, instead of constantly being fitful about it, constantly trying to break out of it by force, as if such a thing were possible, and to just sit in it for a minute and wonder about it, and wonder at it in the Socratic sense of wonder about the ambivalence, wonder that I am neither here nor there. And one of the ways of understanding, I think, the pains of being a certain kind of modern Christian is quite analogous to the pains of being a self, in the way that Kierkegaard describes it, which is that you have it or you are it, right? There's always an implicit modal confusion there, which even comes out in the language. I am it, but I can't quite become it, but I can't not be it, right? It's a mind-bending experience to realize that you're sort of fit, you come pre-fitted with something that you can't quite espouse, and you also can't do away with. And I think he understood that experience, and he understood the uncanniness of that experience, and how painful it is to be a thing and to be also non-identical with it.
Well, maybe it's to love it and then see the simulacrum of it, and be so offended by the simulacrum of it that you couldn't go there. You couldn't go to church and be with these people who are proclaiming to be Christians and are coming short of living that ideal. Or
Kierkegaard is an intense critic of Christendom.
Yeah,
very much so. And boy, there's so much to say.
Chris, you and I have talked about this, and I'm unsure about how to go forward because I don't want to trespass on the confidentiality of our profound friendship. But I mean, I think you are a Socratic Christian in the sense that you grasp the Socratic metaxu and eros, and then you embody Christianity within that matrix, and that is actually the proper way to be a Socratic self. That's a long way of saying it, but did that make sense to you? As that's
beautiful, John. Yeah, it does. I would like to be that. It sounds aspirational. It sounds like the kind of thing that if I could attain it, I would have attained a harmonious relationship with it.
But
And
you're
I don't
doing
always feel like I have the harmony that you described.
but you're doing it. You hear what you're saying? You're saying, I'm not wise, I'm a lover of that wisdom, which is Socratic through and through. You're doing it. You're saying if anyone stands before you and says, I am a Christian, and takes that, right? I mean, some people, that just means I carry a card within a belief cult of some kind, right?
Yeah.
Putting that aside, but in the Kierkegaardian sense, like if you would assert that, you're involved. It's like saying I'm wise. You're engaged in a kind of profound performative contradiction. That if you remove the aspiration to Christ-likeness from Christianity and think it is something that is somehow complete or resolved, then you actually lose the core of Christianity. That's what I mean about a Socratic Christianity.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to impose on you, and I don't want to draw you into anything that is. But I also
I know quite a number of people who I consider to be very kind of profound Christians who can't find their way in the institutional mode of Christianity. I think that's and those are the people I often think are more Christian in some ways.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. If I look out at people that I think I want to say are Christians, I like, and I mean this in like with reverence. I think of Chris as an exemplar of what I think a Christian should be, and I'm not trying to ruin him into anything. I'm not a Christian, and I'm not trying, or like I'm not doing that. I'm not. I think the thing that you're saying, Chris, is actually like I think it's a profound way in which Christianity could be deeply, authentically viable for many people today who cannot see that viability within what remains of Christendom. That's what I want to say.
Mm-hmm. And there's a humbleness, like the word humiliation. This is very close to Christianity, but related to the meaning of being humble. And I guess when Christian was articulating what his feelings are, there's always a profound humility and wanting to go, understand it a little, refine it, get it a little bit more true.
And being okay with not understanding it. I think that's another thing. Like that's another thing that I think I've, like, for instance, I've had this experience recently where I grew up as a Catholic and I would go to mass periodically, and I really didn't enjoy going to mass because, it would get around to the homily of the mass, and I just never found homilies insightful. Like I thought, oh, this is the part of the ritual where they impart wisdom. And it never happened. I never heard a homily or scarcely ever heard a homily that I found that imbued me with some new understanding. It never happened. And I was always so frustrated by that because, I could hear a lecture, right? It's like when I met John, I'm not just flattering you, John, this is true. When I met John, I heard him talk about agape. I thought, why didn't I hear that? Why didn't I hear someone explain this way when I was a kid? It would have saved me years, right? But now, I mean, I had a lot of frustration about it, and it's the frustration that many Christians and Catholics have particularly bad homilies. So maybe it's especially a Catholic thing, but it's an experience that many Christians have, which is they don't find that as they are raised up through the tradition, their rearing through the tradition does not equip them to understand its value. And then they grow disaffected and they grow distant. And then there perhaps comes a time when when their appetite is whet for it again, because they encounter it, as you said, Andrew, they encounter it, this thing that they came reared with. They start encountering it in other guises, in other places, in other parts of the world. They encounter it in myths. They read a fantasy novel and they go, oh, right, there it is again. And then they come to see it as what it is. And slowly they come back. The difference now is, I've started periodically going to masses again. And the difference now is that when I go to the mass now, I don't go for the homily. I don't go for the propositional content. In fact, I don't care about the propositional content, right? I go because there is something deeply of deep contemplative value about tracing the steps of the ritual and allowing it to be unconsciously affecting and to have a relationship. I'm coming in with a lot of conscious propositional content now already. It's like I don't need it to give that to me.
Yeah.
What I do now is I have the propositional content somewhere in the back of my mind, and I try and keep it there. And what I do is I try and let the rhythms of the ritual of the liturgy walk me through something so that there is an unconscious movement through it. And I find that approaching it that way, without the overweening propositional nattering that I had when I was a kid, as most of us do at that age, is profoundly relieving and allows me to settle and rest in the ignorance. Then it becomes a properly Socratic learned ignorance in return. Like that, you know.
There's a way in which. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, there's an author, Catherine Frickstock. She wrote I'm reading several of her books. One is after writing The Liturgical Consummation of Philosophy, and her book Aspects of Truth: A New Religious Metaphysics it's going to be on my top 5 list, I know already. But that what you just articulated there, right? That the liturgical ritual and the fact that it resonates so deeply in you, that is, and I put it to you, and I mean this, and I am respecting your proper modesty and humility, and I'm not trying to trespass on it. But I'm asking you to consider that you have that function for many people, Chris, and that is how I see you as a Christian. The way you speak, there's definitely a lyrical, and there's often almost a liturgical way in which you convey yourself. That, and I mean this as a really deep compliment, that I think has that, and I'm seeing it in the comments. Like you are like Platonic anamnesis. You are waking people back up to their Christianity in a powerful way, and so
it's interesting how that is coming from outside Christianity often these days. Even Jordan Peterson, etc. You know,
I
get it sometimes, but nothing like Chris. I get it sometimes. The people will say, that.
But you've done that. But you've done it for, like, I mean, I'm very touched by you saying that, John. And I have no idea how to wear that. But I mean,
it wasn't meant as any kind of imposition. It was just meant.
No,
as
I know.
Observation.
I know. But it's very touching, and I don't know what to say, but it's very touching. But you know what I mean.
Well, that's why I like talking to you guys. It's like a love fest or something, and I get to be in the middle of it. I'm teasing. I'm sorry.
Chris has always had this, and I've said it before, and I only mean it. I only mean this analogy in a deeply reverential fashion. I see myself, and I've tried to articulate it as a Socrates, but Chris is Plato, and there's always been this interweaving of the spirit of Plato and the spirit of Christ in the West, and Chris embodies that in a way that I think is really, my friend, I've seen you come into your own in the last year and a half in just a profound way, and I think that what we're talking about here today is just deeply a part of it, and it's just been it has brought. I love you as a friend, and it's just brought joy to me to see that happening. And that's, I'm just trying to speak to that. And so, Chris is, Chris has a capacity to, I don't know, to you enact the symbolism, I think, in a profound way. Anyways.
I'm interested. No, that's. I mean, I was making a joke there, but I know that it's. I understand what you're saying. I think, and I think that's true.
Like I said, I couldn't be here without Socrates. I couldn't be here where I am also without Chris. I mean, I profoundly, and I hope this is not meant exploitatively, I profoundly need him. I could not be doing the work as virtuously or as deeply as I need to be doing it without him. That is not going to happen.
So, I have a question for you guys, because John, you
even more true, if anything.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And well, I mean, John knows the reverse is even more true, if anything. And he knows that. And But, you know, one thing that I wanted to say about that is, you know, it's very, you can only, one of the things that I've realized in the last while is that, you know, my capacity to speak depends entirely on the ear that I'm speaking to. And, you know, and I had that suspicion a long time ago, but the last few years of doing this kind of thing has confirmed it beyond any doubt I could ever have, which is that I could have never imagined the extent to which, and this is right at the, this is at the foundation of Dialogos, right? This is at the foundation of everything that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But that the scope and capacity and range of the possibility of speaking, the possibility of expression, and the possibility, therefore, of insight that is available at any given moment depends on the person who is, to me, depends on the person who is sitting across from me and their capacity to draw it out. And the drawing it out might not be a verbal thing at all, right? You know, so it's like if I'm sitting here talking to you both, I just trust in your capacity. I trust in your comprehension, right? I trust that when I speak, you're going to take whatever is said and you're going to draw it out to the fullest extent of its meaning. And you're going to bring forbearance and generosity. And that doesn't mean kindness. That just means that you're going to read in to the fullest extent of what is possible to be read. And most conversations, most relationships in which conversation occurs don't have that. And that doesn't mean that they're pathological or they're bad. It just means that circumstantially, they just don't have that. And often that's okay. But I think it's like, I don't think that what happens when we do this, I don't see it, and I'm not trying to be modest, I really believe it. I don't see it as a feature of myself. I see it as a feature of the process. And I see it as a feature of the container that is created by a dynamic, by a relationship, when it decides to open itself to the fullest possibility of what is said. And that when that opens, you find yourself speaking, right? If it depends where you put the horizon. If the horizon is here, you're going to speak unto it. You're going to speak more. You're going to speak in greater depth and breadth and beauty. If you speak to what is at the furthest distance from where you are. And what these conversations do is they give a symbol for that distance and allow the speech to be directed across it. And that's why, you know, whatever it is that we manage to do, certainly that I managed to do in this space, is a direct consequence of that container. And without the container, like, it's amazing. You just swap the interlocutor. They two people, they could be saying absolutely nothing, each of them, but you swap out the interlocutor and the speech fails. It dies on the vine. It's an incredible thing.
I totally agree with that. And of course I do. We share this vision profoundly. And that's why we're like, we are deeply accompanying each other on this. But I'm trying to relate something to you, and it's coming clear to me as you're saying. It's coming clear to me in the dialogue, in the dialogos actually between us, which is, you know, we're wrestling through the Socrates and Christ, and I'll use that term, although I generally refer to Jesus for reasons I've talked to you about. But Christ is, I'm pointing to the symbolic dimension. I'll just use it that way. And I was wrestling and I, you know, and we went through it, and it was totally valuable. But there was a sense of like, I felt unreconciled, and I'm still getting that with out of Howland's book too. And then I had this. In fact, it was implicit, and it's only coming to explication at this moment in this dialogue. The insight is there was to find, there is no propositional answer, but in your embodying the Socratic Christianity, I found the answer that I could not find in the propositional argument. That is what I'm trying to say to you.
So my question here is, you know, Christopher was talking about the liturgy and the unconscious, and that penetrating him in the mass, and not having any interest in the propositional stuff. Uh-huh. And then John, you are speaking of dialogos, and I'm trying to understand, like, because I guess I like John, I started doing a lot of meditation, and like instead of going to church, and because it was very direct. Zen meditation is pretty clear, it's pretty straightforward, in many ways. There is beautiful liturgies around Zen, but it's just a straightforward thing. You do it, you sit, you meditate, you empty your mind, and you try to have that direct experience with suchness, so it doesn't have that baggage that Christianity, or didn't for me, that Christianity had. And then after that, finding something missing in Buddhism slightly, like this rich sort of liturgy and let's say Sutric Buddhism. I find that the Liturgic Buddhism is much more, it has more richness, phenomenological richness to it, and it's easier for me to go to receive things unconsciously, not just but anyway, I'm sorry, I hope my question's clear, but I'm kind of interested in dialogos and liturgy and the unconscious and propositional, and how all that kind of fits together.
Well, if I could just say something that picks up on what I said to Chris, like there's some, the Neoplatonic tradition has a lot that resonates profoundly. I'm going to make the proposal in my next series that we should bring these two great syntheses, right, that have a tremendous capacity to enter into reciprocal reconstruction with whatever they encounter. That we try and what falls to us right now is to try and get them together as within dialogical opponent processing with each other, sort of rebuild, at least existentially and spiritually, rebuild the Silk Road connecting East and West. That's what I'm going to explore in the next series. But one of the things the Neoplatonic, especially the Socratic dimensions of the Neoplatonic offer, is exactly what I was pointing to, that there is something about, I won't use selfhood because the Zen people are going to get a little bit prickly around that. So I'm going to say something that I don't think they'd want to deny. There's something about the cultivation and physis, the springing forth, the blooming up, the development, the self-transcendence and embodiment of personhood that is revelatory about how we should be and what being itself is. The Platonic tradition repeatedly will say, here's all these arguments, they end in aporia, but look at how this person resolves all of that. That was a Socratic feature through and through. And there's something about dialogos isn't about trying to, you're playing with the propositional, and I mean that, you're playing with the propositional like you play with a musical instrument, but you're playing ultimately with the machinery of persons making persons, people like Socrates and Jesus. I tell you, you must be born again. I'm a midwife, and playing serious play, playing with the musicality of the,
which is what's missing from Sutric Buddhism, because it's always about unpersoning yourself. It's always about, yeah. And
you need to have, and they're both right. That's the thing I want to be really clear of. That's what I mean by we need these two to come together in the most profound opponent processing, not adversarial processing that we, and by the way, this is not de novo. The Kyoto school was trying to do this. Many people were seeing connections between Neoplatonism and Zen. So this is not just, like this is a real thing. There's a heritage, there's some provenance, there's stuff we can work with. But I think what the Neoplatonic tradition, especially the Socratic dimension, offers is there's something about the dialogical examination of life and the disclosure of the living grammar of person formation that is fundamental to living wisely and being in contact with some of the deepest aspects of reality. Sorry, this is something that and this is why, like I said, some of them, when you can have that, where you can see, right, how you can, there's something about the way persons are these inherently paradoxical things that are nevertheless not falling apart from contradiction, that they can be the proper locus for the resolution of significant challenges that we face. So dialogos is all about that as a practice.
Well, where I go to find that is in the Hebrews tradition and studying. There seems to be a warmth in the Hasidic tradition, and a humor and an incredible kind of intimacy between the master and student, that, you know, and it doesn't have this sort of triumphalism that, you know, the grandiosity of the big churches, but it also has this human intimacy, which I feel is lacking in some of the more Eastern traditions. Or
I mean, there's a book, I forget where I have it here. You know, there's a proper non-dualism that's found in Hebrew religion.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
They're very powerful, and you know, there's a lot of work. James Dunn has done some of the most important work on the early Christians are Jewish, and we forget this.
Yeah.
We forget this. Jesus is Jewish. This is one of the reasons why I can't see Jesus as the Messiah, but I won't get into that, because I think the Messiah is like a deeply Jewish thing, and we have to understand that from the Jews. But I'm not here to debate Christianity. But I think Jesus, especially the way I see people like Chris embodying that spirit, I think it's perfectly consonant with what you just said, Andrew. Would you agree, Chris, or am I imposing on you?
No, I would. You know, I was thinking, John, that was the first time, like, when you described dialogos you described it very agapically as being this process of creation or the recreation of personhood, of persons. And I don't think, I mean, it's consonant with everything that we've been discussing and exploring these last many months. But you know what? I don't think any of us have actually said that, or not that I've heard in those words before.
That's a warmer version, maybe, or something. Like, it's a warmer version.
No, I think Chris is right. I think it's been, think I've thought it.
That's great.
It's always remained implicit. I think dialogos is a way in which logos and agape are being interwoven together in a deeply profound way. And I think that, if it's not presumptuous, that's one of the central claims of Christianity, right? But I think it's also a central claim of the Socratic project. I think Plato is bending eros into that direction clearly in things like the Symposium and etc.
Right. You know, I mean, the three of us did, meaning we three, you know, you, Andrew, and John and myself did a series of dialogues or dialogos on Inventio, you know, the re-inventio of different ideas, like soul and eros and friendship and whatnot. And what we're talking about is in dialogos is the re-inventio of persons, the inventio of person.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's right. And I think that is something that should be properly understood as both as a ritual practice in the deep sense of ritual that I've been trying to develop over the last year, but also nevertheless as rational. But I've been also trying to argue about the deep interconnections between ritual and rational. I think we're in the process of reinventio also what ratio means in a profound way.
And it captures both, right? We always take care to say, but it's so important. It captures both meanings, right? The tension between invention and discovery, recollection and creation, which is exactly what happens when dialogos catches your whatever insight. And the propositional insight is not the thing. It's, to John's point, it's the embodied insight. It's whatever the embodiment, it's the embodied form of the insight and not the propositional token of the insight that matters. And whatever that is as it catches and surfaces as being both something, as you say, de novo, but also something remembered.
And it's Plato's anamnesis too.
That's
right?
Anamnesis, exactly. And that's what happened. And we can scale that to the most intimately personal. and to the most impersonally general, right? It's like, I mean, you lectured about this, John, in Awakening, but this idea, like when you talk about sati, it's like when I remember myself, when something about myself is disclosed to me, it is disclosed as a memory.
Yeah.
It is not disclosed as something extraneous that I catch out from the air and becomes part of me. It discloses as something that comes from within, that is then revealed. It's the aletheia, it's the revelation. Yeah. And that's how insights in Dialogos are always described. They're always described as the unearthing of memory.
It's amazing, Andrew, how regularly, reliably, we're going to be doing our 5th one. We get people saying, and they speak paradox. But again, without being, they are persons, right? But they say, I discovered a kind of intimacy I didn't know about that I've always been longing for.
Yeah,
which is,
I guess, remembering is bringing the members together again, like the different broken pieces of.
If you want to play with the term, it turns out that's not the etymology. Yeah,
it's not the etymology. Okay, but
it's not the etymology. It's not the etymology, but nevertheless, you can still play with the word that way to bring it up. Yes.
Yeah. And it's not, I mean, it's become so important to detach. Like, I think, I like what you're saying about this sort of, that it is the embodiment of the, I mean, this is what we were talking about with Socrates and Kierkegaard too, right? It's the embodiment of the contradiction. Like contradictions, things that don't fit together, things that can't catch in the logos and fit together on the propositional level because they create absurdity. They create absurdity because the propositional is not where they fit together. Where they fit together is in character. And I know that was something that you were wanting to talk about, Andrew, is this idea of character and what character actually means and the development of character. And that what I hear you saying, John, is that the things that strike us as being insoluble dilemmas on a propositional level, and when people confront Christianity, especially Christians who confront Christianity and are so disaffected by it, and are so find it so cold to the touch, are almost always grappling with the propositional contradiction, right? And propositional contradiction, and there are so many that they're impossible to enumerate. They're everywhere, but they're so caught up in their relevance, right? The hyperinflated relevance of propositional contradiction that no one has tutored properly and enculturated the process of dropping down, of using the absurdity of the propositional contradiction to drop down below it.
Which is, it's maybe that's the irony that you were talking about in your series.
That is the irony. Exactly.
And also this ability to be fluid with symbols and swim and contradictory, multiple paradoxical meanings and inhabit that world which isn't so But
let's be careful. Yes, but not in some intellectually lazy fashion. It's like the koan. It has to be a ball of red hot iron that you swallow that burns to your core, right?
That's right.
Anything less than that is just pretentious. And and the whole Socratic project of learned ignorance that comes to a culmination in Nicholas of Cusa is about, you have to go. Cusa talks about like you're marching, or you're on a journey. You get to this wall that's insurmountable, and you have to bash yourself against the wall until you realize that you can't break. Andrew, I'm not saying you were saying this. I just want to make it clear for people who are listening. This is not some easy. We meet lots of people who are contradictions. I don't care if I'm like those people. Like I'm sorry, but I have very little patience for them, because that's to go too far the other way. That is to also inappropriately understand the relevance of the propositional.
Well, sometimes when I hang out with philosophers, they accuse me of being a mystic, and it's often an insult, because I really enjoy studying the, Meister Eckhart and, Sufi mysticism. I like studying all the different schools of mysticism, and I probably enjoy that more than I enjoy reading Hegel. And I got a lot of friends who like to read Hegel, but so
there's a lot of mysticism in Hegel.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, that's true as well. But I mean, people who are very hardcore in the I guess it's my temperament as well. It's something like that. I try not to be too flaky, but sometimes I am for sure.
I wasn't accusing you.
I know, John.
Specifically said I was not doing that.
I know. I'm sorry.
But what we're talking about too here is like we're talking about a process, like a process of the humiliation of the ego, right? It's this presumption to comprehension, this presumption to a propositional way of compassing reality that these traditions are trying to disabuse us of, right? And it is, I mean, for someone like Kierkegaard, one of the more and this does go back to his critique of Hegel, speaking of the devil, but like one of the things that he's balking at is this idea that you can use a propositional certitude to compass reality. And
like the rational is the real.
I get that there are multiple readings of Hegel, so I'm not trying to put Hegel in my crosshairs. I'm just trying to say where Kierkegaard's coming from in all of this is to say, I think, is to say that you must get to a point where you come to this realization, an embodied realization, a humiliating realization, that your capacity to get an objective purchase on reality with the use of proposition, with the use of philosophy, as he would put it. He's remarkably disdainful of philosophy in that meaning, right? To try and use the philosophy the philosophy that the more scholarly philosophy, we might say, right? Or the more analytical philosophy, to try and compass things is a doomed fool's errand. Because what we actually need to do is we have to find the place where that project meets its absolute end. Yeah. And in finding the place where that project meets its end, we find ourselves humiliated before the sheer unknowability of what is most real.
I wonder if that's where the real philosophy begins, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's where real philosophy begins, not with the analytical stuff, with understanding kind of, I guess, the dead end of trying to encompass the world in concepts and.
But I just want to make sure we don't lose part of what Chris said. You can't just go there. You have to traverse the whole open plane of the propositional before you could get to that horizontal place.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sure.
You can't just sort of right. I feel it. Right. That I'm sorry. I think the worst things come from the best things turn bad. And I think the mystical, when it's corrupted into the sentimental and the narcissistic, which those are often woven together, is some of the worst that we can get to. And so for me, thank you. For me, this is exactly, Socrates is a lover of argumentation, but he also loves beyond argumentation to what argumentation ultimately aspires to and presupposes. And I think for me, that's the proper message to take to heart about this.
And that's this sort of gap.
The aporia.
Aporia.
That's why the dialogues are, it's not like he eschews argumentation, right? The whole dialogue is an argumentation and it induces an aporia, but you actually have to follow the argumentation first, I think is what you're saying, John. It's like you can't bypass that process. You can't fast track your way through it. You can't just jump to the end. It doesn't work that way because it's having to walk the gauntlet. It's the getting to the end that actually gets you into a state of receptivity so that when you meet the end, you have some sense of how to submit yourself to what dwells beyond the boundary that you come upon.
It's exactly right. And it's deeply analogous to the Zen idea that enlightenment is not realized by seeking, but only seekers will realize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That I guess it's about unveiling, a continuous process of unveiling and undoing all the mechanical sort of certainties that we have.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So for me, this tension, I've been deeply influenced by Drew Highland. All of his books on Plato, I think, are a masterpiece. He and Schindler are, I think, the most important people to read about Plato. I've had the great pleasure of having a couple deep conversations that got into the dialogos with David Schindler. But Highland argues that Plato is trying to keep us in tonos. I want to use the Greek word, not the English word, because the English word tension has almost completely negative meanings, although there's a little bit of positive still left in it. But Heraclitus speaks of the tonos of a bow. Like there's a tension there, but it's what powers the bow, right? So that's what I mean by tonos. And Highland is saying what Plato is trying to do is to live in the tonos between finitude and transcendence. We will never escape our finitude. We will never escape our mortality. But if we only dwell in that, we will fall into despair and servitude. Now, why? Because we are also capable of transcendence. And this is what makes us something other than just finitude. We're finitude that is capable of transcendence. But if we think we can become pure transcendence, then we fall prey to hubris, and we will be smitten by the gods, or we will become the tyrant that we always feared. And so holding in tonos, finitude and transcendence, which I think, Chris, is the proper Platonic development of Socratic metaxou, the in-between, right? I think that's the key here. And if we can always, in this discussion we're having about our capacity for argumentation, our capacity for argumentation allows us to transcend our bestiality in a way that nothing else can, right? But if we think that will ever liberate us from our embodied animal existence, we are pretentious beyond belief. We have to hold a tonos about this. And so I have taken that deeply to heart. And so I become extremely critical of people who want to relax the polarity into one of the poles.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Well, Gershev would say that human being is trapped between the angel and the animal. And maybe that's the pain of Kierkegaard or something like that, right? He's very in touch with the angel, but also, and then there's the animal bit to deal with, and maybe it's related to his engagement with Regina and all of that, and this tension, this tonos, I guess, is an even better word for it. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, and I think that the idea that the relationship between the two terms is interesting too, right? Because under one aspect or in one state or frame of consciousness or stage of life, however we define it, tension can seem a more apt word because of the pains that it seems to draw from us, right? So in one frame of mind, it is experienced as a tension, an irreconcilable tension. And in another state of mind, perhaps that's one way of thinking about it. We can think of it as kind of progressively or developmentally, that what you want to do is take the tension and make it into tonos.
Oh, that's beautiful, Chris. That's beautiful.
And I think that's totally rife through Kierkegaard. There's no doubt about it. One way I think that this is this that you just described, John, of the relationship between the finite and the transcendent. I mean, we're so accustomed to thinking about it in sort of overtly religious terms. But one thing I find really helpful, one way I find it helpful to think about it, is to think about it by analogy. And it's not even by analogy, it's symbolically, because it's an instance of the thing that it's describing, is to think of the relationship that a person has with their family. And, there's this, and one of this is one thing that that both the Russian and the American theater traditions have rendered so absolutely brilliantly, is this tension that a person has between their individuation, the thing that draws them away from their roots, away from the tribe, right, out into the horizon on the quest to be who they are independently of what has created them, And the forces of the tribe, the forces of familial belonging that draw them back to where they come from. And that tension is one of the most fertile grounds for drama, canonically, I think, for that reason, because what it's trying to depict, like Chekhov was great at illustrating this. Someone like Arthur Miller in the US tradition was amazing at illustrating this. That these great dramatists, I think, what they do is they show that, you know, because your family represents all kinds of things symbolically, but among them is they represent the thing about you that is the necessity of you, as Kierkegaard might say, the things about you that you cannot transcend, that you cannot avoid being. You are a member of this family. These are your parents. These are your siblings. This was your rearing. You are, this is your birth order. You're the middle child. You can't, like, you will never not be those things. Never. No matter how, no matter what happens to you in your life, no matter how great your successes might be, no matter how much you distinguish yourself, you will never not be the middle child. You will never not be your mother's son. You will never not have come from here. That's indelible. You can't do away with that in a great many people. And this is like one of the great motifs in literature, is people trying to get out of that and find that they can't get out of that, right? That's why the homecoming is such a trope in literature, right? The person who has gone off and distinguished themselves with transcendent success has to come back home to their family because someone has died, and they have to become entangled again in the reckoning of all of the things that they tried to avoid about themselves and didn't manage to escape. And it's this great confrontation with the finite dimension of their lives that throws the transcendent dimension askew, because it deprioritizes its relevance, because they have invested all of the relevance in their selfhood in that transcendent side. So, like, when we're thinking about the balance and the harmony or the disharmony of those two ends of the dichotomy, we don't even have to think about it in these sort of, we don't have to think about it in mystical terms. Like, we can think about it in very, very concrete terms, the kind that anybody, whether they have a religious life overtly or not, can relate to.
That's exactly, isn't that exactly what Kierkegaard also is always struggling with? Like those, not the family versus, God and Christ.
Yeah,
and
that's
totally.
Abraham and
that
Isaac.
is what he's struggling with, isn't
Totally.
It's
Totally.
Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah.
It's him wrestling with that story of Abraham and Isaac. Totally. I mean, because Chris talked about, there's also the literature. I mean, you can even think of these two great myths that found the West, the homecoming of Odysseus, and then the going up to the promised land of Abraham, right? And because there's also a sense in which if you never leave home, think of the glass menagerie, you're not going to become a person in the right way. You're going to get too involuted, right? And so the tonos, right? And we carry these two great myths around. So I think Kierkegaard is definitely, he's definitely aware of that tension, and of course he ends up. I love this idea, Chris, that he does this aspect shift of the tension into tonos, but he does seem to ultimately prioritize the relationship to the transcendence, at least in the Abraham story, over the family.
Does.
And of course he does that also in his relationship with Regina, right? I'm not going to be married. I'm not going to have a family in order to have the proper relationship with God.
Totally.
But then there's always, at least to my reading, I always get this sense of nostalgic regret that he, like, running through his, like, I shouldn't have done that, or not I shouldn't have done it, but maybe I wish I hadn't have had to have done that, or something like that.
I think
the cost
exactly,
was so huge, right? The cost.
Exactly. I think it's something like, I know I did what I had to do, but I wish I could have done otherwise. It's something, it's like, it's both. You're picking up on that really well. It's like, I think that he believes very earnestly that he needed to, I think you're absolutely right that he ultimately prioritizes the transcendent and feels that he needs to bypass the familial and the bonds of marriage, the bonds of an admirably ethical existence in that sense. Although Siddhartha, in his myth,
I was thinking
does
about
the same
Buddha,
thing, doesn't
all the
he?
great mystics.
Because he leaves the palace, he leaves his family behind. So I think he finds himself consistent with the demands of a religious anagoge. But I think the difference is because he is human all too human, and he's not Siddhartha and he's not Socrates.
Yeah.
Part of him remains forever submerged in the very finite pains of regret and remorse and guilt. And part of him dies with the death of the familial bond that, despite himself, he loved and needed and wanted, however much he believed and invested himself in the transcendent aspect of his own vocation. And both were true at the same time, which is exactly the pain of it, right?
Yeah.
Well, I just get the crucifixion again. This is what he went towards the crucifixion. There's other myths where Krishna goes in the forest and dances with the gopis. Like I almost like, this is almost my whole struggle with Christianity, right? It gives you the crucifixion, and then it seems to end in tragedy. I know there's supposed to be a resurrection, but I still don't see dancing in the forest with the gopis. I don't see Kierkegaard doing that. And I find that very tragic.
Well, I mean, you can't really have one without the other, right? Like you're hardly a Christian and I know it's hard. Like I don't mean to say I find this easy at all. But I think, I don't think it means that Kierkegaard identified with only the crucifixion without the resurrection. Like I think it has to be both. It has to be both. Mm-hmm. And he was not someone who was incapable of conceiving of the joy and peace and love and all of those aspects, all of those virtues of Christianity that are, those virtues can be offered up. If they lack the suffering and the pains and the passion of the symbol of the crucifixion, they can be served up as pablum. And there is a version of Christianity, the version that he railed against and inveighed against, that was served up as pablum.
Or the afterworld,
Right.
Everything is always in the afterworld.
Christianity is metaphysical fire insurance. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what I grew up with. And I just, the cowardice, and I don't mean to be pejorative here, but I'm just talking about how, in addition to the way it traumatized me and sort of it hurt me, but the cowardice that was in that, I must continue to exist no matter what. That's why I was so blown away when I read Moby Dick and like, what is man that he should desire to live out the lifetime of his God? Like, maybe you shouldn't exist forever. Just like really sit with that for a while, right? And I think a proper part of courage is coming to that realization that although it seems profoundly urgent, and I'm not denying this, and I'm not claiming to be somebody of tremendous courage or anything like that, but the realization that there's no absolute reason why I should continue to exist. I think that's the beginning of a deep kind of courage. And Andrew, isn't the crucifixion kind of doing that? Kind of.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I get that.
That's the courage to be. I think the title of Tillich's book comes to mind when you say that. Yeah.
Andrew, I hope I hope you've experienced this as friendship, serious play with you, because I of course have deeply and continually struggled with Christianity in ways that you're articulating here, and so I'm as much thinking aloud, trying to come up with responses as I am. I'm not just countersaying you or anything like that. That's not what I want to be doing.
Oh no, I never felt that. No, and
Good.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, as it is sort of a struggle rather than me wanting to make some kind of claim about anything. It's more like, I think for my whole life, I've struggled with the image of the cross and Christianity itself. And there's always been a struggle with that. yeah. So that's all. I guess.
I think
I could say about that, and thinking that, okay, there is this the life denial aspect of it, which Nietzsche so well expressed, which is a very big danger of Christianity. I wouldn't put that. I wouldn't say all Christians fall into that, but this life denying aspect, I guess, is what I struggle with.
which is odd because Jesus came promising life and the abundant life, and Christianity has always strongly rejected a notion of personhood as in any way disembodied. That's the whole point of the resurrection. That's the whole point of at least the mythological point. Mythos understood positively, not pejoratively.
Yeah.
And for me, like when Christ. Yeah, I'm trying to use Christ when it's just I'm trying to emphasize the mythological. When my God, why have you forsaken me on the cross? I think that's where he's hitting something really, really profound.
Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't doubt for a moment that it's extremely profound. Like, I also like Girard's description of Christ as being the revelation of the scapegoat mechanism.
Yes,
that makes total sense to me. And that's the profundity of Christianity is revealing that.
It has to be taken into the heart, the very participatory heart of the scapegoat option, and then blown apart from the inside, right? And that's is why Jesus, being somebody who lives in parable, is so important, because parable is going to take you into the heart of the narrative and then blow it apart from the inside. And then Jesus enacts that. I think Girard is right about that in a profound way. That's one of the thing that is there's a task for current theology, which is to properly integrate that into Christology in some fashion that is not going to just sit within a theology department, but reach into the laity, as they used to call it.
The laity, right? Yeah.
It's funny when you describe yourself as struggling with it, Andrew. Like that lands, something just sort of lands very, very tenderly for me when I hear you say that, and the thing that I find myself thinking when I hear you saying something like that, like I just struggle with this image. I just struggle with it. It's just, I think that's like,
that's what you're supposed to do if you're a Christian.
Yeah, like we spend so much time thinking. Yeah, we spend so much time thinking that's a problem, instead of a process, and I think that is, in some sense, that's like, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, like that's one of the things that he talks about a lot in his spiritual exercises, right? It's like there's something so deeply confounding. And I think that talking about it in terms of courage, I had a discussion with Ken Lowry about this recently too. We were talking about this a lot, John, about this idea of being confounded by the courage. Like, let's take it on a very, very human level. A very, very, like, forget the transcendent for a moment. Like, just take it on a human level, right? Being confounded by the courage of voluntary sacrifice and crucifixion. Like, if we just gently put aside everything else in the picture and just focus on that for a moment, okay?
Sure.
If we focus just on the courage required, same in the Socratic sense, except of course, the degrees of suffering are different, right?
Yes.
Which is crucial between the two myths, between the two stories.
But we can relate that to things in the world too, like this Russian prisoner behind a glass, 30 years old, his life has been destroyed, and you see images of that all the time, and of people making those kind of sacrifices. Sorry to interrupt, but
Socrates does die a very dignified death. When Jesus is, the point of crucifixion is absolute, and I'm now using this in the pejorative sense, absolute humiliation, depersonification, and the most profoundest kind of humiliation. And especially for a Jewish person to be crucified, that renders Jesus an abomination in a powerful way. And of course, the Romans knew this. That's why the Romans never crucified a Roman citizen. A Roman citizen was always beheaded.
Yeah.
Much more dignified.
Yes.
Yeah, something about him being off the ground too was
right. A kind of a perverse elevation.
Yeah,
right?
He was king of the Jews
Yeah.
above him, right?
Yeah.
There's a perversion. Gentlemen, I'm going to have to leave soon. I have to go get a puppy.
Go get a puppy. So we have the crucifixion, and then we have a puppy. There we go.
That's how it resolves.
That's how it resolves.
It resolves by getting a puppy.
Okay. Well, we got really deep into Christianity today, boy. Thank you guys for a wonderful conversation. So great to see you again.
Andrew, I'm not blaming you. You were in part responsible for that. You were really wrestling with it in profound ways, and I think that was that took courage, and I felt that you were inviting us into that with you, and I thought that was a really good journey to go on together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. What I really enjoy, I feel like when we talk, it goes beyond just like a podcast conversation. I feel like I lose a sense of time and space and direction and what's going on. And so when you end it, I'm a little bit confused. I think I'm going to walk around after this conversation, bump into doors and things like that. So anyway,
thank you. I echo what John said. There's something about what you do that and you're remarkably patient too, because we get very excited when we talk with you, and there's something about this dynamic that just gets us really gets us going. And you're both deft at directing it, but also very patient with it when it gets excitable.
Well, thanks a lot.
So thank you.
It's a huge pleasure for me. I hope we can do it again. Obviously.
Oh, let's do it again. It's been too long since we've done it. I know it was for important reasons, and I'm not being dismissive of that, but yeah, let's do this again. I always enjoyed this a lot.